The classroom was like a fortress. Thick metal walls surrounded 23 students, who sat in chairs that looked more like battlesuits than school furniture. Each seat had its own air supply, emergency shields, and panic buttons that could seal the student inside a protective bubble in less than 2 seconds. Lee Do-yun walked through the heavy doors wearing nothing but simple clothes, a plain shirt, regular pants, and basic shoes. No helmet, no protective suit, no weapons. The other students stared at him like he was walking naked into a fire. "Is he insane?" whispered Kavieth, a tall blue creature with 6 arms and crystal formations growing from his head. His computer was already running safety calculations, and the numbers made no sense. How could any being survive in this room without proper protection? The classroom was designed for studying the galaxy's most dangerous animals. The walls could stop laser blasts. The air filters could clean out deadly poisons in seconds. Emergency medical robots hung from the ceiling, ready to save students who made even small mistakes. Professor Velthari stood at the front of the room. She was old, even by her species' standards, with gray scales and eyes that had seen more. Dangerous creatures than most beings could imagine. She had been teaching this class for over 300 years. "Today we will work with a live specimen," she announced. Her voice was calm, but every student knew what that meant. Someone might not make it home today. Blubron, a creature that looked like a large snail with tentacles, pulled deeper into his shell. His species came from a peaceful world where the most dangerous animal was about as threatening as a flower. Even with all his protective gear, he was terrified. "The creature we will observe is a vegan shadow stalker," Professor Velthari continued. "It comes from a Class 3 world. While not the most dangerous animal in the galaxy, it has killed 17 researchers in the past 50 years. A metal box rose from the floor in the center of the room. Inside, something moved. The box was surrounded by energy barriers, metal walls, and enough firepower to destroy a small building. Standard safety protocol for any live animal study." Do-yun looked around the room with curiosity. Back home on Earth, his grandmother had kept chickens that were more aggressive than this setup suggested. His father had taught him to handle farm animals since he was 5 years old. This seemed like overkill for what sounded like a small predator. "Who can tell me the proper approach for initial observation?" Professor Velthari asked. Sisaketh raised one clawed hand. He was from a proud warrior species that considered themselves the galaxy's greatest hunters. "Maintain distance of at least 10 meters. Use remote sensors for all measurements. Keep emergency sedatives ready. Never make direct contact." "Correct." The professor nodded. "Now, we will demonstrate proper technique." She pressed a button, and the energy barriers around the box became transparent. Inside was a creature about the size of a house cat, but it looked nothing like any Earth animal. Its body was covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Rows of sharp spines ran along its back. Its eyes glowed red in the dim light, and when it opened its mouth, 3 rows of needle-sharp teeth were visible. The moment the barrier became see-through, the shadow stalker went wild. It threw itself against the walls of its container, making sounds that hurt to hear. A smell filled the air, the scent of pure fear and aggression. Several students activated their emergency shields automatically. The creature's spines extended, making it look twice as large. Its eyes locked onto the nearest student, and it began making a noise like metal scraping against stone. This was the sound that had driven many researchers insane before the creature ever touched them. "Note the fear response in yourselves," Professor Velthari said, though her own hands were shaking slightly. This is a natural reaction to the creature's pheromone release. Your protective suits will filter out most of the effect, but some will still reach you. Park Minji, the only other human in the class, watched the creature with interest rather than fear. She was studying theoretical xenobiology and had read about shadow stalkers before, but she had never seen one react this violently. Something was wrong. Do-hyun stood up from his seat. The movement was slow and casual, like he was getting up to stretch during a boring lecture. Every eye in the room turned to him. Student Lee, Professor Velthari said, "Please return to your seat immediately. The creature is in an aggressive state." But Do-hyun was already walking toward the container. He moved with the same relaxed pace he used when approaching his grandfather's old hunting dogs back home. His hands were empty and open at his sides. He wasn't making any threatening movements. "Stop!" Kavieth's computer was screaming warnings. "The probability of survival at that distance is less than 12%. The shadow stalker saw Do-hyun approaching and became even more aggressive. It threw itself against the barrier with such force that the entire container shook. The sound it made now was like a scream of pure rage. "Mr. Lee, step back immediately." Professor Velthari reached for the emergency controls. "I am activating full lockdown." But Do-hyun raised one hand in a calm gesture. "Wait," he said quietly. "Please, give me 30 seconds. The professor's hand froze over the controls. In 300 years of teaching, no student had ever made such a request. The smart students followed safety protocols. The brave students followed safety protocols. The dead students were the ones who ignored safety protocols. But something in Do-hyun's voice made her wait. He reached the edge of the container and did something that made every student in the room gasp in horror. He began removing his shoes. Then he sat down on the floor, cross-legged, just 3 feet away from a creature that could kill him in seconds. The shadow stalker was now in a complete frenzy. Its spines were fully extended, its claws were scraping against the metal, and the smell of its fear pheromones was making several students sick, even through their protective suits. Do-hyun closed his eyes and began speaking in a soft, low voice. He wasn't using Galactic Standard or any language the translator systems could recognize. He was speaking Korean, mixed with soft clicking sounds and gentle humming. "Gwenchana," he said softly. "Gwenchana. It's okay. It's okay." The other students watched in stunned silence as the human sat peacefully next to certain death, speaking gently to a creature that wanted nothing more than to tear him apart. Do-hyun continued speaking in his soft voice, mixing Korean words with gentle clicking sounds that seemed to come naturally to him. The shadow stalker was still throwing itself against the container walls, but something strange was beginning to happen. "Jin Jong-hae," Do-hyun whispered, then made a series of low clicking noises with his tongue. "Jin Jong-hae, calm down." Professor Velthari had her finger on the emergency lockdown button, but she found herself frozen in place. In all her centuries of teaching, she had never seen anything like this. The human was completely relaxed, sitting within striking distance of a creature that had killed trained professionals. Kavieth's 6 arms were moving rapidly across his computer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "The fear pheromones are decreasing," he whispered to himself. "But that's impossible. The creature should be becoming more aggressive, not less." The shadow stalker's movements were starting to slow. Its spines were still extended, but it wasn't throwing itself against the walls as violently as before. Instead, it began pacing back and forth inside the container, keeping its red eyes fixed on Do-hyun. "What is he doing?" Blubberon asked from deep inside his protective shell. How is he? Not dead? Sketh, the proud warrior, hissed softly. In his culture, this was a sound of respect for someone showing incredible bravery, or incredible stupidity. He wasn't sure which this was. Park Minji leaned forward in her seat, watching her fellow human with fascination. She had grown up on Earth too, but she had spent her time in cities, studying books and computers. Do-Yun was from a rural area where people still worked with animals every day. She was beginning to understand that this might make a big difference. The shadow stalker stopped pacing and tilted its head to one side, listening to Do-Hyun's voice. The sound it was making changed from an angry scream to something that almost sounded like confused chirping. The aggression indicators are dropping rapidly, Kavieth reported, not believing his own instruments. Heart rate decreasing. Stress hormones falling. This should not be possible. Do-Hyun slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a piece of dried fruit he had brought from Earth as a snack. Without making any sudden movements, he placed it on the floor between himself and the container. "Meok go sipeo?" he asked gently. "Are you hungry?" The shadow stalker moved closer to the wall of its container, near where the fruit had been placed. Its spines were slowly beginning to retract. The red glow in its eyes was becoming less intense. Professor Velthari found her voice. "Student, Lee, what you are doing goes against every safety protocol we have developed over centuries of study. That creature is extremely dangerous." "Yes," Do-Yun said without taking his eyes off the animal. "It is dangerous, but it is not evil. It is scared and angry because it has been trapped in a small space with bright lights and loud noises. On Earth, we have learned that scared animals become aggressive animals." He continued making the soft, clicking sounds, and now the shadow stalker was responding with similar noises. It was trying to communicate with him. "Communication with shadow stalkers has never been achieved," Professor Velthari said, her voice shaking slightly. "They are considered too primitive for language." "Maybe they just needed someone who knew how to listen," Do-Hyun replied. The creature was now pressing itself against the wall of the container closest to Do-Hyun. Its spines had retracted completely, and the fear smell in the air was almost gone. Instead, students could detect something else: curiosity. Do-Hyun slowly removed his outer shirt, leaving him in just a thin undershirt. The action made several students gasp, but he moved so calmly that even the shadow stalker didn't react with alarm. He folded the shirt and placed it on the floor like a small cushion, then sat on it. "My grandmother taught me that animals can smell fear and aggression through almost any barrier," he explained quietly. "But they can also smell calm and kindness. The protective suits you all wear, they hide everything. The animal cannot tell if you are friend or enemy, so it assumes you are enemy." Sisketh's warrior instincts told him that removing protection near a dangerous creature was the height of foolishness. But his warrior's experience also told him that this human understood something about predators that even his proud species had missed. The shadow stalker began making a new sound, a low, rhythmic purring that none of the students had ever heard from the species before. It was almost like the sound a contented cat would make. "Gurai, Joun Aya," Do-Yun said softly. "That's right. Good animal." Park Minji was taking notes frantically. "The behavioral change is incredible," she whispered to Kavieth. "It's like he turned off its fear response completely." "But how?" the crystal-headed alien replied. "We have studied these creatures for decades. They are classified as non-communicative, aggressive predators. Doyen reached very slowly toward his pocket again. This time he pulled out a small water bottle. He poured a little water into the cap and placed it near the container, next to the piece of fruit. The shadow stalker immediately moved to where the water was, just on the other side of the barrier. It pressed its nose against the wall and made soft whimpering sounds. "It's thirsty," Do-hyun said simply. "When did it last have water?" Professor Velthari checked her notes with trembling hands. "Hydration was provided 18 hours ago. Standard protocol for specimens under observation." 18 hours? Do-hyun looked surprised. "On Earth, we give water to animals every few hours. A scared, trapped animal needs more water than a calm one." He looked directly at the professor. "May I ask permission to lower one section of the barrier, just enough to give it water?" Every student in the room made sounds of alarm. Blubberon pulled so far into his shell that only his eyes were visible. Kavieth's computer began flashing emergency warnings. "Absolutely not," Professor Velthari said firmly. "The safety protocols exist for good reasons. Many researchers have died studying these creatures." "Maybe they died because the creatures were scared and desperate," Do-hyun suggested gently. "A thirsty, frightened animal in a cage will attack anything that comes near. But an animal that has been treated with kindness, that is different." The shadow stalker was now lying down near the barrier wall, as close to Do-hyun as it could get. It had completely stopped making aggressive sounds and was instead making the soft, purring noise continuously. "Look at its body language," Park Minji said, understanding starting to dawn on her. "It's not in an attack posture anymore. It's in a resting position." Professor Velthari looked at her instruments. All the readings confirmed what the students could see. The creature was calm, possibly calmer than any shadow stalker in recorded history, but 300 years of safety training were hard to ignore. "Student Lee," she said slowly, "what you have accomplished is remarkable. But I cannot allow direct contact with the specimen." Do-hyun nodded respectfully. "I understand. But could we maybe improve its living conditions? Better lighting, fresh, water more often, maybe some natural sounds from its homeworld." The suggestion was so simple, so obvious, that it made everyone in the room realize how little they had been thinking about the creatures they studied as living beings rather than just dangerous objects. The shadow stalker stretched out completely, looking more like a sleeping pet than a deadly predator. Its breathing had become slow and peaceful. The next day, the classroom was packed. Word had spread throughout the university about the human who had calmed a shadow stalker without any protective equipment. Students from other departments had come to see if the stories were true. "Professor." Velthari looked nervous as she addressed the larger crowd. "Today we will continue our study of xenofauna management. Student Lee has agreed to explain his methods." Do-hyun stood up, feeling uncomfortable with all the attention. He was just a farm boy who had grown up around animals. He didn't understand why that was so amazing to these alien students. "I don't have any special methods," he began. "On Earth, humans live with dangerous animals all the time. We keep creatures called dogs in our homes. Dogs came from wolves, pack hunters that could kill humans easily. But we learned to live with them, and now they are our friends." Kavieth raised one of his 6 arms. "But dogs have been domesticated for thousands of years. Wild animals are different." "Yes, but the principles are the same," Do-hyun replied. "We also live near wild bears, wild cats, poisonous snakes, and many other dangerous creatures." My village had problems with wild boars that could kill a person with one charge, but my grandfather Kim Hyrie taught me how to read their behavior, how to avoid making them angry, and how to calm them when they were upset. Susketh hissed skeptically. Your grandfather fought wild boars? No, he didn't fight them, Do-Yun said. He understood them. Fighting only makes animals more dangerous. Understanding makes them predictable. Professor Velthari had spent the night reviewing the recordings from yesterday's class. The more she watched, the more confused she became. Everything the human had done went against established safety protocols, yet it had worked perfectly. Student. Lee, she said, could you explain more about these understanding techniques? Do-Yun thought for a moment. Animals communicate with their whole bodies. Humans learn to read these signals because our lives depended on it. When a dog's tail is high and stiff, it might attack. When its tail is low and wagging, it's friendly. When a cat's ears are flat against its head, it's scared or angry. When they're forward, it's curious. He looked around the room. Yesterday, the shadow stalker was showing all the signs of a terrified animal. Its spines were up because it felt threatened. It was making noise because it was trying to scare away danger. It was moving quickly because it wanted to escape. Park Minji was taking notes rapidly. So you treated it like a scared animal instead of a dangerous predator? It was both, Do-Yun said. Scared animals are often the most dangerous, but if you can help them feel safe, they usually become less aggressive. Blabron emerged slightly from his shell. But how did you know it was safe to get so close? I didn't know for sure, Do-Yun admitted, but I could tell from its behavior that it was more scared than angry. On Earth, my family raises cattle. A scared cow can be just as dangerous as any predator, but if you approach them correctly, they will usually calm down. Professor Velthari made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Today we will test these techniques with a different creature, something more challenging. She pressed several buttons on her control panel, and a new container rose from the floor. This one was larger and had even more security systems around it. This is an Altarian spine wolf, she announced. It's from a Class 6 world and is considerably more dangerous than the Shadow Stalker. It has venomous spines and is highly intelligent. The creature inside looked like a cross between a wolf and a porcupine, but much larger than either. Its spines were already extended, and it was pacing back and forth with obvious aggression. Its eyes were bright yellow and filled with intelligence and anger. Standard procedure requires full hazmat protocols and sedatives, Professor Velthari continued. But I am curious to see if Student Lee's methods will work on a more advanced predator. Several students made sounds of alarm. Even Sis Keth looked worried. Do-Yun studied the spine wolf carefully. It was definitely more dangerous than the Shadow Stalker, but its behavior patterns looked familiar. It reminded him of the hunting dogs his village elder Kim Hyrie had trained. It's not just angry, he observed. It's frustrated. Look how it's pacing. That's not hunting behavior. That's the behavior of an intelligent animal that's bored and wants to get out. He started walking toward the container, but this time he moved differently. Instead of the calm, slow approach he had used with the Shadow Stalker, he walked with more confidence, keeping his shoulders straight and his head up. What are you doing differently? Park Minji asked. The Shadow Stalker was like a scared cat, Do-Hyun explained as he walked. This one is like a strong dog. Cats need gentle reassurance. Dogs need confident leadership. When he reached the container, the spine wolf stopped pacing and stared at him. Its spines were still extended, but it wasn't throwing itself against the walls like the Shadow Stalker had done. Do-Yun didn't sit down this time. Instead, he stood straight and looked directly at the creature. He made a sharp clicking sound with his tongue, not the gentle sounds he had used before, but something more authoritative. The spine wolf tilted its head and made a low, growling sound. He's communicating with it, Kavieth whispered in amazement. Do-hyun made another series of clicks, then a low whistle. The spine wolf responded with its own sounds, not aggressive growls, but something that almost sounded like questions. "This is incredible," Professor Velthari breathed. "Interspecies communication with a Class 6 predator has never been achieved." The conversation between human and alien predator continued for several minutes. Do-hyun would make sounds, and the E-Dada spine wolf would respond. Gradually, the creature's spines began to retract. "My grandfather taught me that every animal has a language," Do-hyun explained while maintaining the communication. "Humans learned many of these languages because we had to. We couldn't always run away or fight, so we learned to talk." Finally, Do-hyun made a specific gesture, pointing at the ground near his feet and making a firm clicking sound. To everyone's amazement, the spine wolf lay down. "Sit and stay commands," Park Minji said in wonder. "You're using basic dog training, techniques on an alien predator." "The principles work with most intelligent pack animals," Do-hyun replied. "You just have to learn their specific language." The spine wolf was now lying calmly, watching Do-hyun with what looked like curiosity rather than aggression. Its spines were completely retracted, and its tail was moving in what might have been the alien equivalent of a gentle wag. Professor Velthari looked at her instruments. All readings showed the creature was calm and responsive. "Student Lee, would you be willing to conduct a basic health examination? We have been unable to get close enough to this specimen for proper medical evaluation." "With proper safety measures in place, yes," Do-hyun agreed. But instead of the complex hazmat procedures normally required, he asked for something much simpler: a pair of thick work gloves and a basic medical scanner. "That's not nearly enough protection," Blue Bron protested. "Too much protection will make the animal suspicious again," Do-hyun explained. "Trust is easily broken." With the professor's nervous permission, a small section of the barrier was lowered. Do-hyun approached slowly, still making the authoritative clicking sounds. The spine wolf remained calm, even as the human came close enough to touch. For the next 20 minutes, Do-hyun conducted the most thorough examination of a spine wolf in galactic history. He checked its teeth, measured its spines, listened to its heartbeat, and even collected sample materials for analysis. The creature cooperated completely, sometimes even seeming to help by positioning itself for better access. When the examination was finished, Do-hyun stepped back and made a dismissive gesture. The spine wolf immediately returned to its resting position, no longer showing any signs of stress or aggression. The classroom was completely silent. Even Professor Velthari didn't know what to say. Finally, Kavieth spoke up. "How is this possible? My people have been studying xenofauna for centuries, and we've never achieved anything like this." Do-hyun shrugged. "Maybe it's because we're from Earth. We had to learn to live with dangerous creatures, so we developed instincts that other species didn't need." He looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. "On Earth, we say that necessity is the mother of invention. When your world is full of creatures that can kill you, you either learn to understand them or you don't survive." Dean Morthak stood in the observation room above the xenobiology lab, watching the recordings from the past 2 days with growing irritation. He was a Herbani, a species that had evolved on peaceful grasslands where the most dangerous creature was about as threatening as a butterfly. To him, the idea that any being could communicate with dangerous predators seemed impossible. "This human is either incredibly lucky or incredibly foolish," he told Professor Velthari. "Our safety protocols have been developed over centuries. They exist because researchers have died." Professor Velthari looked tired. She had spent the night reviewing every piece of data from Do-hyun's interactions with the creatures. The results were undeniable, but they challenged everything she had learned in her 300 years of study. "The evidence suggests that Student Lee's methods are not based on luck, she said carefully. His success rate is 100%, and his techniques show deep understanding of animal psychology. Dean Morthak's leaf-like ears fluttered with annoyance. Understanding? He's a student from a primitive world. Our scientists have advanced degrees and centuries of experience. Perhaps that's the problem, Professor Velthari suggested quietly. We've been approaching these creatures as subjects to study, not as living beings to understand. The dean's skin changed to a darker green, which in his species indicated strong disagreement. If this human's methods are so effective, then he should have no trouble with our most challenging specimen. Professor Velthari felt her scales turn cold. You don't mean the Void Serpent, Dean Morthak said firmly. If he can handle that creature, then perhaps his techniques have merit. If not, then we can return to proper scientific methods. News of the test spread through the university like wildfire. By the time the demonstration was scheduled, not only was the main classroom packed, but observers from other universities had arrived. Some came to see what they hoped would be a breakthrough in xenobiology. Others came expecting to see a human make a fatal mistake. The security measures for this demonstration were unlike anything the students had ever seen. Medical teams stood ready. Emergency containment protocols were activated. The entire section of the university could be sealed off and flooded with knockout gas if necessary. Do-hyun sat quietly in the preparation room, trying to center himself, the way his grandfather Choi Woo-sung had taught him before dealing with difficult animals back home. He could hear the worried whispers of the other students through the walls. Park Minji found him there. You don't have to do this, she said. Everyone knows you've already proven your point. No, Do-hyun replied calmly. If I only work with easy animals, they'll always think it was luck. And maybe they'll be right. He looked at her with a slight smile. Besides, my father Kim Kyung-jae always said that the most dangerous animals are often just the most misunderstood ones. The Void Serpent's container was brought in under maximum security. The creature inside was 3 times larger than the spine wolf, with black scales that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed with an eerie purple fire. It had tentacles instead of legs, and psychic abilities that could drive unprotected minds insane. This creature is from a Class 15 world, Dean Morthak announced to the packed auditorium. It has killed 12 researchers in the past century, including several who never got closer than 50 meters to its containment unit. The Void Serpent was already showing signs of extreme agitation. It was thrashing inside its container with such force that the entire security system was shaking. The sound it made was like the screaming of metal being torn apart. Its psychic attacks can cause hallucinations, memory loss, and complete mental breakdown, the dean continued. Standard protocol requires a minimum distance of 100 meters and full psychic shielding. Do-hyun studied the creature carefully. Unlike the other animals he had worked with, this one looked truly alien. Its movements didn't follow any pattern he recognized from Earth animals. Its sounds were completely foreign to him. But there was something else. Something in the way it moved that reminded him of an old bull his grandfather had owned. An animal that had become violent and aggressive after being kept in too small spaces for too long. What do you know about its natural habitat? Do-hyun asked. Professor Velthari consulted her notes. It comes from the deep caves of Void Prime, total darkness, high humidity, constant background noise from underground water systems. Do-hyun looked around the laboratory. Bright lights, dry air, and sterile silence. How long has it been kept in these conditions? Approximately 8 years, she replied. 8 years in the wrong environment, Do-hyun said quietly. No wonder it's going insane. He turned to the control room. Can you dim the lights to almost nothing? Increase the humidity in its container? And do you have any recordings of water sounds from its home world? Dean Morthak's skin turned an even darker green. Those are not standard safety protocols. They're not safety protocols at all, Do-hyun agreed. They're basic animal welfare. You wouldn't keep a fish in a desert, would you? The technical staff looked to Professor Velthari, who nodded slowly. Within minutes, the laboratory's environment had been changed. The lights were dimmed to barely visible levels. The humidity was increased until the air felt thick and moist. Speakers began playing the sound of dripping water and distant underground streams. The effect on the Void Serpent was immediate. Its thrashing slowed, then stopped completely. The horrible screaming sounds it had been making faded to softer hisses. "Remarkable," Kavieth whispered. "Environmental adjustment alone has reduced its stress indicators by 60%. But Do-hyun wasn't done. He asked for something that made everyone in the room gasp: permission to enter the Serpent's chamber. "Absolutely not," Dean Morthak declared. "That is suicide." "Maybe," Do-hyun admitted. "But look at it now. It's calmer than it's been in years, isn't it? Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is the safest thing for everyone." The debate that followed was intense. Professor Velthari argued that Do-hyun had earned the right to try his methods. Dean Morthak insisted that no student's life was worth risking for an experiment. Finally, a compromise was reached. Do-hyun would be allowed to enter the chamber, but with every possible safety measure in place: emergency extraction systems, psychic dampeners, and enough medical support to handle any injury except immediate death. As Do-hyun prepared to enter the chamber, he thought about his grandmother Yang Soo-hee, who had taught him that even the angriest animal was usually just a scared animal that didn't know how to ask for help. The chamber door opened with a soft hiss. The Void Serpent was lying in a coiled position in the center of the space, its purple eyes fixed on the entrance. In the dim, humid environment with the sound of water in the background, it looked less like a monster and more like a very large, very tired animal. Do-hyun entered slowly, his movements careful but not fearful. He had left behind all protective equipment except for a simple breathing mask. The psychic dampeners would interfere with any attempt at communication. The serpent raised its head and made a low, questioning sound. Do-hyun responded with a sound he had never made before, something deep in his throat that seemed to come from an instinct he didn't know he had. The serpent tilted its massive head, listening. Then it made the sound again, softer this time. "He's communicating with it," someone whispered over the intercom. "The psychic readings show it's trying to establish mental contact." For the first time since entering the chamber, Do-hyun felt truly afraid. Not of being hurt physically, but of what he might find if he opened his mind to this ancient alien intelligence. But his grandfather had taught him that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what needed to be done despite the fear. Slowly, carefully, Do-hyun lowered his mental defenses and allowed the Void Serpent's consciousness to touch his own. What he found there was not the monster everyone feared, but a creature of incredible intelligence and deep, aching loneliness. It had been alone in a sterile cage for 8 years, surrounded by beings who saw it only as a dangerous object to be studied. The contact lasted only a few seconds, but in that time, Do-hyun understood more about the Void Serpent than all the previous research combined. When he broke the connection, tears were running down his face. The serpent had settled into a completely relaxed position, its eyes now showing what could only be described as gratitude. "It's not dangerous," Do-hyun said softly into his communicator. "It's just lonely. It's been alone for so long that it forgot how to interact with other living beings without causing harm." Over the next hour, working with the serpent's cooperation, Do-hyun was able to conduct examinations and gather data that researchers had been trying to obtain for decades. The creature actively helped, positioning itself for measurements and even demonstrating its psychic abilities in controlled, harmless ways. When Do-hyun finally left the chamber, the silence in the observation room was complete. Dean Morthak's Skin had turned a pale green that in his species indicated deep shock. How? Was all Professor Velthari could manage to say. Do-hyun looked exhausted but peaceful. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones that need the most kindness, he said simply. 6 months had passed since the day Do-hyun first walked into Professor Velthari's classroom. The Galactic University of Xenobiology looked very different now. Where once there had been sterile, fortress-like laboratories, there were now spaces, designed to make the creatures comfortable rather than just contained. The Shadow Stalker that had once been kept in a bare metal box now lived in an environment that mimicked its home world. It had become so calm and cooperative that advanced students were able to work with it directly, learning hands-on animal care instead of just reading about it from a safe distance. The Altarian spine wolf had become something like the university's mascot. It greeted visitors with what the staff had learned to recognize as friendly behavior, and it actively participated in research studies. Students from across the galaxy came to learn Do-hyun's communication techniques. But it was the Void Serpent that had caused the biggest changes. Once the most feared creature in the university's collection, it now served as an assistant teacher, using its psychic abilities to help students understand the emotional states of other animals. Its loneliness was gone, replaced by what could only be called contentment. Do-hyun stood in his new office. He had been given the title of Intuitive Xenofauna Specialist, the first position of its kind in galactic history. Through his window, he could see students from dozens of different species working directly with creatures that had once been considered too dangerous to approach. "The applications keep coming in," Park Min-ji said, as she entered his office with a stack of data pads. She had established the Human Galactic Exchange Program and was now its director. "Universities from all over the galaxy want to learn these methods." "It's not really about the methods," Do-hyun replied, watching a group of students outside. "It's about changing how we think about these animals. Once you stop seeing them as monsters and start seeing them as individuals, everything else follows." Kavieth appeared in the doorway, his crystal formations now decorated with small symbols that Do-hyun had learned indicated academic honors. "The Crystarian Science Council has officially requested that Deathworlder studies be included in our core curriculum," he announced. "They want to understand how different planetary environments create different types of intelligence." The blue alien had become one of Do-hyun's closest friends and strongest supporters. His 6 arms allowed him to take notes faster than anyone else, and he had documented every technique Do-hyun used. But more importantly, he had learned to apply the principles himself, developing approaches that worked for his own species' way of thinking. "Any word from Earth about sending more exchange students?" Do-hyun asked. 17 applications approved so far, Park Min-ji replied with a smile. "But they're all from farming communities or places where people work closely with animals." The selection committee realized that city humans don't have the same instincts. It had become clear that not all humans possessed the same abilities. Those who had grown up around animals, especially in rural areas where technology couldn't solve every problem, seemed to have developed intuitive understanding that their urban cousins lacked. Professor Velthari knocked on the doorframe before entering. At over 300 years old, she had initially resisted changing her teaching methods. But the results were impossible to ignore, and she had become one of the strongest advocates for the new approach. "The Council of Deans has reached a decision," she announced. "Effective immediately, all xenobiology programs in the galactic education system will include mandatory courses in Deathworlder studies and intuitive animal communication." Do-hyun felt a mix of pride and worry. "I hope they understand that this isn't something you can just learn from books. You have to actually spend time with animals, learn to read their behavior, develop trust, which is why we're establishing field study programs on various death worlds," Professor Velthari replied. "Students will spend time on planets like Earth, learning directly from species that evolved in dangerous environments." Blubberon slithered into the office, moving much faster than he had 6 months ago. The timid creature had overcome much of his natural fear and now worked directly with Class 4 specimens. He had discovered that his species' natural empathy, once he learned to control his terror, made him excellent at detecting emotional distress in animals. "The Void Serpent is asking for you," he reported to Do-hyun. "It says it has something important to share." Communication with the Void Serpent had evolved far beyond the initial contact. The creature's psychic abilities allowed for complex conversations, and it had become an invaluable source of information about other deep cave species. They found the serpent in its new habitat, a large, humid chamber designed to replicate the caves of Void Prime. It was no longer alone. The university had managed to acquire 3 others of its species, and they had formed a small community. When Do-hyun approached, the serpent gently established mental contact. The message it shared was both exciting and concerning. There were many other dangerous species throughout the galaxy that had been misunderstood, kept in inappropriate conditions, and labeled as impossible to work with. The serpent had been in psychic contact with some of them across vast distances. "It's offering to help us communicate with them," Do-hyun translated for the others. "But it wants assurance that they'll be treated with the same respect it has received." The implications were enormous. If they could apply these techniques to the hundreds of so-called impossible species in research facilities across the galaxy, the advancement in xenobiology could be revolutionary. Over the following weeks, Do-hyun found himself busier than ever. Delegations arrived from universities throughout known space, scientists who had spent decades studying creatures from behind. Barriers wanted to learn how to interact with them directly. Not all of the attempts were successful. Some species were simply too alien for current understanding. Others were genuinely too dangerous, their aggression not based on fear or misunderstanding, but on fundamental predatory nature. And some aliens struggled to develop the intuitive skills needed, their own evolutionary backgrounds too different from the Deathworlder experience. But the successes far outnumbered the failures. Seseketh had returned to his homeworld and established a program training his fellow warriors in animal communication techniques. He had discovered that his people's predatory instincts, properly channeled, made them excellent at understanding other predators. A delegation of Herbani, Dean Morthak's species, had initially struggled with the concepts. Their peaceful evolution had not prepared them for thinking like predators or understanding aggression. But they found that their natural empathy made them gifted at working with herbivorous species that other researchers had overlooked. The most unexpected success came from the molluscoids like Blubran. Their natural caution, once overcome, proved to be an asset when working with easily startled species. They developed techniques for calming creatures through patience and gentle consistency. 1 year after his first day in Professor Velthari's class, Do-hyun stood before the largest academic conference in galactic history. Representatives from every major university and research institution had come to hear about the developments in Deathworlder studies. "The most important thing we've learned," he told the assembled crowd, "is that intelligence takes many forms. Humans developed certain skills because our world forced us to. Other species developed different skills because of their worlds. When we combine these different types of intelligence, we can achieve things none of us could do alone." He gestured to his friends and colleagues who had joined him on the stage. "Kavieth's analytical abilities help us understand the science behind the techniques. Blubran's empathy helps us recognize emotional distress in ways I never could. Professor Velthari's experience provides the safety knowledge that keeps everyone alive. Park Minji's organizational skills make it possible to teach these methods to others." The audience listened intently as he continued. "We used to think that advanced technology was the answer to everything. But sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. Sometimes sitting quietly and listening is more effective than any machine." In the months that followed, Deathworlder studies became one of the fastest-growing fields in galactic academia. Students flocked to programs that would teach them to work directly with dangerous fauna. Research that had been stalled for centuries began moving forward rapidly. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed Earth and its inhabitants. No longer was it seen as a primitive backwater world. It was now recognized as a training ground that produced beings with unique and valuable skills. Do-hyun often thought about his grandmother Yang Soo-hee, who had taught him to be gentle with frightened animals. She had died before he left for the university, and never knew that her simple lessons about treating animals with kindness would revolutionize an entire field of science. As he watched students from across the galaxy learning to communicate with creatures that had once been considered monsters, he realized that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't technology or weapons or psychic abilities. It was understanding. And sometimes, the key to understanding was as simple as sitting down, listening carefully, and treating every living being with respect.